One. Okay, so now we are in live. Hello for all the attendees. Thank you so much for being here. This is this event, so really thank you for being part of all the events on all of these 3 days. So today we have with us Eric Shen. He is from Australia, and it's going to show us how to monitoring your Canvas apps with Azure Application Insights. So we really appreciate to have you here, Eric. Thanks so much. It's an honor. So the public's yours, my friend.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Eric, and I'm very excited to share my session with you today on monitoring your Canvas Power Apps with Azure Application Insights. The goal for today is to provide you with an introduction to Azure Application Insights and how you can use it to improve the monitoring, logging, and diagnostic capabilities of your Power Apps. I'll start off by talking about some of the challenges Power App makers are facing today. I'll briefly touch on what are the out-of-the-box analytic and capabilities and tools from the Power Platform, and then how Azure App Insights aim to address some of these challenges by providing a much more holistic and powerful application performance monitoring solution. I'll then provide an overview of App Insights and talk about how you can provision an instance within Azure and connect it up with your Canvas Power Apps. Once we have our Canvas apps talking, we'll then walk through the key features of App Insights, including how you can send traces from your app to Azure, as well as monitor your application telemetry and perform alerting. So before we begin, just a quick introduction. My name is Eric Chang, and I'm a digital solutions architect at Komatsu Australia. I've been working with Microsoft low-code and pro-code technologies for over a decade across Office 365, business applications, and Azure. I'm also a certified Azure architect, DevOps engineer, Power Platform maker, and trainer. If you do have any questions regarding today's session, please feel free to also reach out via social media, email, or you can also find me on the Microsoft Power Automate community forums, where I enjoy helping everyone learn more about the Power Platform. So let's first talk about some of the challenges app makers are facing today. And really, if you think about it, some of these challenges that you'll hear ain't really that different to what pro devs are facing when we talk about custom web applications and also native mobile applications. So let's imagine for a minute, you're a maker and you've developed your first Canvas app. You proudly published the first version and you shared it with a few members of your team. Over time, word gets around about how great your app is, and you start getting a few more requests from other teams, and you start sharing your app to more and more people. And over time, before you know it, half the organization is using your application. You continue to start developing enhancements and publishing these enhancements to your users as you would. But suddenly, you start getting emails from frustrated users that your app isn't working. It could be users are starting to get strange errors, or there could be performance issues. Maybe some screens aren't loading, or your app is just generally slow. And I guess this is one of the first challenges for many app makers, and that is everything is reactive. Unless you're constantly using your app and monitoring your app 24 hours a day, you're always going to be the last person to know about potential behavioral issues or performance degradation. And often by that time, it's often too late. So how do makers become more proactive about supporting their applications so they can be on the front foot of resolving issues before it snowballs into a much bigger problem later on? So if we continue on with our scenario, as a good maker, you decide to drop everything and start troubleshooting your app. So first, you might want to isolate your performance issues, but where do you go to view and access granular performance data relating to your application? Data down to each screen so that you can identify exactly which part of your application is actually degraded. Next, you might want to troubleshoot and fix those errors your users are complaining about. These errors might be happening intermittently, or they might only happen during a particular time in the day. You open up the app, you've tried to replicate the errors, but you can't seem to get the error to pop up. So where do you go to access the logs or traces so you can look back at a point in time when the error did occur so that you can work on fixing those? So I hope by now I've highlighted some of the key challenges that makers and developers in general are facing, especially when their apps suddenly scale to many users and they find that they need the tools and insights to help them support their application quickly and easily. So on the topic of tools and insights, let's actually see what is also available out of the box with the Power Platform first, because Power Platform does provide some very useful analytics and tools. And I think it's very important to understand what these are out of the box, because they may be sufficient for your needs. You may have a smaller team, you may have a smaller user base. Conversely, you might turn around and say, hey, you know what? I need that extra level of granularity in terms of visibility of my apps, or I need those extra features that will allow me to be more proactive and alerting me of issues with my applications. So with that said, I'm going to quickly switch over to my Power Apps Maker portal, and let's look at some of the out-of-the-box features that are available first. So within Power Apps, what we're going to do is we're going to click on Apps, and I'm going to select my Power App. You'll notice in the top navigation, there's an analytics section, which is in preview and also monitor. So we'll quickly talk about these two. In analytics, when we click on it, you will be shown the analytic data of your application over the past 30 days. The data is shown or rendered as Power BI dashboards, as you can see. So if you're familiar with that and how you filter and slice and dice these visuals, you'll be right at home. But the application telemetry is going to be split across three sections: usage, performance, and location. So usage is all about your data, how your users are accessing and using your application. What device and also what platform are they accessing your application on? Are they accessing it from a PC, on a mobile, via the web viewer, or the native mobile apps? You can also see things like the daily, the times your application has been launched, and also how many active users, as well as the version of players that your users are accessing your application with. And it starts to give you a bit of insight into, okay, maybe my users are accessing it from a much older version and they need to upgrade. Or conversely, they may be using a very new version and they might be breaking changes. If we go to performance, we can see some high-level performance analytics regarding our application. So as you can see, we can see things like the time it took to load the first screen, both the first time of opening the application and also of subsequent loads. We can also see how long users are accessing or staying within our application, the session time, and we can also get a count of this by the session duration. And lastly, we can see the location. So if you've got a user base spread across multiple locations, you can see where your users are accessing your apps from. So as you can see, I'm obviously in Australia. It's not right in the middle, but it's quite close. So again, it will start to give you insights into maybe, problems with users are in a particular location and things like that. So as you can see out of the box, the analytics is pretty good. But if we take a step back and look at the analytics more closely, it treats the application as a black box and reports on the app as a whole. For some use cases, it might be more than enough. But as a developer and also as a maker, I might have a business critical application that might be more on the complex side. There may be many screens, a lot of business logic, API calls. For me, I want to be able to see a lot more granularity in the details and what's happening within my application, not just as a whole. I want to see the user flows. How are users accessing and traversing my application? What are they clicking on? The time it took to load each screen. And all this is really important for me because it allows me as a maker to really quickly isolate problems and troubleshoot errors within my application quickly and easily. And on the topic of troubleshooting, another feature that's available out of the box is the monitor capability. Now, this is a feature that allows you to perform real-time debugging of your application. So what you can see here is you'll have a Play Published App button. If you click on this button, you'll launch the latest published version of your application. And what you can then do is really just click around and access your application as you normally would. You can see a record button, and that just basically knows you're recording this against your debug session. But if we go back to monitor, you can start to see your events coming in real time. We can see things like timestamp, the category of the event. Was it a screen load? Was it a user action? Did they do something? We can see the result, the time it took. And if you've got API calls or custom connectors, you can also see the status code and also the request and response payload of those calls. So I'm actually really impressed with this tool because it's very useful. And as a maker, I use it quite a lot during the build phase of my apps. And it's a tool that I use to iron out the kinks in my app. However, the feature that makes Monitor great, in my opinion, is also one of its limitations. As you can see, it's real time and it's real time only. So what it means is you need to be using the application to be able to debug the application. Yes, you can download your events as a JSON file and upload it so you can have a snapshot of that data, but there's no retention settings. So you can't really save all your events and then look back at an earlier point in time when the error did occur and fix those errors. So again, just like the analytics we saw earlier, the debug capabilities of Monitor, which is out of the box, is very useful. And again, it may be more than sufficient for your needs. However, for myself, I want that history of all the logs, all the events over time so I can query that data. And also by having a history of all my logs and events, I can start doing some pretty cool things like performing anomaly detection, to alert me when my app isn't behaving as it should. And I can also do things like alerting me based on other metrics. And I guess this is where Azure App Insights come in. Azure App Insights is a fully managed application performance monitoring service in Azure. It's part of a much larger family of services called Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor is a complete separate topic of its own, and it's all about providing functionality to enable you to maximize the availability and performance of your applications from the app itself, the infrastructure, and also the network. It's important to note that App Insights isn't really solely used just for Power Apps or the Power Platform. In fact, it's a versatile platform agnostic application performance monitoring tool. What that means is you can use it across a myriad of different web applications, mobile apps to perform things like server and client-side monitoring, distributed logging, availability testing, monitoring and alerting, dashboarding, everything. So now that we've briefly talked about Azure App Insights and how great it is, let's actually go to Azure Portal and walk through how you would provision an App Insights service within Azure. But before that, if you don't have an Azure subscription, don't worry. You can actually go and sign up for a free account with Azure and you'll get the equivalent of about $200 credit for the first 30 days. After that 30 days, you will still have access to a range of popular services for 12 months, and you'll also retain access to 25 or more services for life. Now, in terms of App Insights, which is what we're talking about today, you will get about 5 gigabytes of logs ingestion per billing account per month included. So it's actually a really good starting point and a really good incentive to really go into Azure, and see and check out App Insights and see how you can leverage that within your Power Apps. So with that said, let's go to our Azure portal. So within your Azure portal, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look for Application Insights. And when you click into App Insights, you'll see any additional resources that you may already have. And I'll talk about this as part of my later demo. So as you create an App Insights instance, you'll just click on Create, and you'll be taken to the creation screen. So here you'll need to provide a few bits of information. Firstly, you'll need to specify your subscription. So if you've got multiple subscriptions tied to different billing accounts, you just need to select the one that you want to use. You'll need to specify a resource group. So a resource group is just a container for you to group related Azure resources together. Imagine you have a project. You might have Azure App Insights. You might also have some app services, which is used to host websites or web APIs. You might have some serverless functions like function apps and logic apps. You might have some storage accounts. So it allows you to basically simplify the management and also the cost billing aspect of your resources within a single container. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create a new resource group. And you'll need to give your Azure App Insights instance a name. Next, you need to specify your region. So this would be the location closest to yourself. So for me, that's Australia East. And lastly, you'll need to select the resource mode. So when you create App Insights, you now have two options. You can create a classic-based App Insights instance or a workspace-based App Insights instance. With Classic, it's the easiest. However, as you can see, it is going to be deprecated in 2024. There is an upgrade path from Classic to Workspace. However, if you are thinking to be a bit serious or a bit more serious in App Insights and your monitoring of your Power Apps, it may be worth it to actually start with Workspace base. With Workspace, you do need to provision an additional Azure resource called Log Analytics Workspace. It's a centralized log repository in Azure, and it will automatically provision it for you. So there isn't really that much additional work. In terms of functionality of App Insights itself, it's very similar. The only differences, and some of the differences, is that it's a bit more performant, it's faster. You get a lot more pricing options, so you can have commitment tiers. You can purchase more upfront for lower cost. There's also things like private endpoints, so you might want to have it within a private network, and also encryption, so customer managed keys. But it does take a lot longer to create. So, and from our point of view for our demos, it's exactly the same. So I am actually just going to create a classic and then click on review and create. So I'm going to click on create, and it's going to kick off the provisioning of my Azure App Insights instance. So whilst that's getting created, I'm going to show you how we can connect our Canvas apps to that newly created Azure App Insights. So if I'm going to go back to apps, I've got a Power App here, and I'm going to go to edit, and it's going to open up my app in App Studio. Now I'm going to go back into Azure, and as you can see, my resource has now been created, so it's very quick. I'm going to go to the resource, and I just need to get one piece of information, and that's the instrumentation key. So the instrumentation key is a GUID. You can see it forms part of the connection string. So since we're on the Power Platform and there's a tight integration with Azure, we don't need the connection string, but basically it's used to, if you've got a web app or native mobile app, it's used to let your app know which app instance, Azure App Insights instance, belongs to you, and also which one you want to send your application telemetry to. So for us, we're just going to copy out the instrumentation key. We're going to go back into our App Studio. And what we're going to do is go to the tree view, go to App. And as you can see on the right-hand side, there's actually a text box there called instrumentation key. So I'm just going to paste that in. Simple as that. Now, if you go to File and try to save, you'll actually notice it doesn't detect that change. That's fine. What we're going to do is just make a small tweak. You might move things up and down just to trigger that change event. And now you can save your application. And once you've saved your application, you can go and publish that application. So that's pretty much it. You've now connected your Canvas app to Azure App Insights, and it's going to start sending application telemetry, those events, to Azure App Insights. Now, if you are following or you get to this point and you go to Azure App Insights, you'll notice that you'll probably won't have any data there straight away. Now, according to Microsoft documentation, it can take up to 30 minutes between your application sending the data and it coming into Azure App Insights. From my experience, it's usually about 10 to 15 minutes. But again, just keep that in mind. When you get to this stage, there is a bit of a delay. So I guess in the true spirit of all live demos, I'm going to go to an existing instance of Azure App Insights because it's going to have some historical data, which we can then use as part of our walkthrough. So this Azure App Insights instance, as I mentioned, contains some data. It's connected to one of my other Power Apps. It's the same Power App in the sense that it's a Pokemon app. So I'll quickly open up this application so you can see what it actually does. So this Pokemon app is a Canvas app. It's very simple. There's 3 screens. There's a home screen, a name screen, and the name screen just allows you to type in the name of the Pokemon, hit the search button, and it will call a custom connector, which will call an API. It's a Pokemon API, it's freely available, and simply just gives you some details about that Pokemon. So you can see we've got the image and we've got some attributes of that particular Pokemon. And I can type in another Pokemon as an example, and you can see it's going to do the same thing. In image, what it does is it allows me to pass in the URL of an image of a Pokemon, okay, as you can see. And what it's going to do is it's going to do a reverse image search of that particular image and then give me the details of that Pokemon, as you can see. So very simple. Now, the purpose of this isn't really to show you how the app works, but it should give you a context into the screens. And also, if I remove the Pokemon name and hit the Pokeball button or the search button, it's going to go and give me an exception because I haven't passed in the name. So the exception or the error message contains a correlation ID that I've provided or programmed into the app, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm going to copy this ID out because it's going to be useful when I talk about Azure App Insights. Okay. So if I go back into App Insights, let's talk about some of the features within App Insights. So the first thing that I want to talk about are logs. Logs are important because it's where all your application telemetry is going to be stored. So as you can see on the left-hand side, there's a number of tables, including page views, traces, availability results, etc. Now, I do want to make something clear. I mentioned earlier, Azure App Insights can be used not just for Power Apps or Power Platform, but for everything, a lot of things, including web applications and native mobile apps. Because of this, there are going to be features within App Insights which aren't going to be relevant in the context of Power Platform. What that means is there may be some data that's not going to come through, at least through the out-of-the-box integration. So things like exceptions, dependencies, for example, are not going to come through. So I will talk just solely on the things which there will be data and would be useful for you as a maker. So as I mentioned before, each of these tables contain application telemetry. If I go to the page views table, you can see things like the timestamp, an identifier, the name of the screen, the URL, the time it took, and you can see it's also featured engineered some additional columns. So for example, based on the duration, it's created a column called performance bucket, and it's classified that as under 250 milliseconds. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the logs within App Insights is used to drive all the functionality across App Insights. In this case, the performance metrics. If I go to traces, for example, and run that, traces are custom messages that I send from my application, which is useful for debugging. You can see I've got things like the timestamp, the message, the severity level of the trace. I can drill down and look at, for example, the custom properties I'm sending as part of this trace message. So I'll talk a little bit more about traces later on. So Azure App Insights also contains something called Custo query languages. So Custo queries are very much like SQL queries. It allows you to query your logs using a syntax-based language, and it allows you to think through things like apply filters and conditions and things like that. So here I've got a very simple Custo query, and all I'm doing here is I'm going to query my traces table, look for traces where there's a severity level of 3, which are errors, and I'm also going to look for the trace with a correlation ID equals to the one that I copied out earlier. So if I click on run, you can see I've got 2 traces because I clicked it twice. And you can see everything about that particular trace is displayed here. You know, I've got the name, the severity level, the custom properties, etc. Now, the great thing about Azure App Insights is I don't need to go and write these queries to, try to find things. There's a lot of ways to actually for makers to find insights from their logs without having to have any programming or querying language experience. For example, you can use transaction search, which allows you to actually search your logs using free text. So if I click on see all data in the last 24 hours, I can see all the events coming in from my Power App over the past 24 hours. If I do a search for error, for example, and do a search, it will return me all the events with the keyword error over the past 24 hours. And you can also adjust the time range as well. So if I click on this particular trace, it will give me the same information that was in the log table earlier. What's more, I can then go and see the timeline for this session. So I can actually go and see how that user used my application when they experienced this error, where they accessed it from, what device, what browser, and I can see that they launched my application, they went to the home screen by default, they clicked on search, they clicked on photo, they clicked on search again, and then boom, they had the error. I can also see things like the timeline of that user over time. So on the 20th of November, I accessed the application, 6 times, or probably a lot more, and I can see for each of those times what they were doing. So again, it gives me these insights to try to replicate that error that the user experienced. So if I go back out of this and remove some of these filters. Now, if we look at this section in the middle here, we can see different categories of events. We've got availability tests that I'll talk about a little bit later. We've got page views, traces, and custom events. And we also start to see some with zeros. So as I mentioned before, with the native or out-of-the-box integration with Power Apps, some data do not come through. What comes through out of the box by default are page views. So if I go and try to look for a page view like this one here, it will give me some high-level details of who that user was, what they accessed, and also a timeline. But that's pretty much it. It doesn't provide me with that much additional information. So to provide those custom messages, we have traces. But because they are custom messages, you will need to program those messages into your app. So let's go and see how you would do that within your Power App. So I'm going to go back to the Pokemon app we saw earlier. I'm going to go edit it in App Studio. And I'm going to show you the formulas that we're going to be using to actually send those traces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the search screen. I'm going to click on the search button or the Pokeball. I'm going to go to the on select event and I'm just going to drag that down. So what I'm doing here is several things. I'm declaring a global variable called var error and setting it to blank. I'm going to call my custom connector, which will call the Pokemon API, and I'm passing in the name of the Pokemon via the text box. Now I have something called an if error function. The if error function is an experimental preview feature. So to use that, what you need to do is you need to actually go to settings. You need to go to upcoming features, experimental, and you just need to go and enable this formula level error management. Now this is separate to the trace. This just allows you to detect whether there was an error in this example with that API call. So what it will do is it will go and set that var error global variable with a static error message and a correlation ID, which is just a GUID, if it detects that error. Now, I will check if that variable was blank. If it isn't, if it is, I'm assuming there's no error messages. And I'm simply using the trace function to pass a trace into App Insights. So trace will take in several properties: a message, a severity level, in this case I'm passing informational, and also a record which is in JSON. So I'm passing in a username, email, a token, an ID, the screen. You can pass in any custom properties that you want, which will help you to debug your application. Now, if there is an error, so if var error isn't blank, I'm doing the same thing. I'm using trace, but I'm setting the severity level to error. And I'm also passing some different JSON values as part of my properties. So that's pretty much it. So this is how you would send those traces to Azure App Insights. Now, if you have a look here, you'll notice there's actually an exception section here. So again, out of the box, the native integration won't let you pass those as exceptions. There are workarounds. So for example, you can create a web API or an Azure function, use a custom connector, and that will allow you to log those errors as exceptions. What we've done here, obviously, is also a bit of a workaround. We use the trace with a severity level of error, and you can also use critical to actually simulate those exceptions. And it allows us to do very similar things as we'll see very shortly. So that's the transaction search. The next thing that I want to talk about are alerts. So alerts allow you to create rules, and it will allow you to trigger notifications or an action when those rules are when those conditions of those rules are met. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and create an alert rule. So when we create an alert rule, by default, it will have a scope, which will be our Azure App Insights instance. We need to go and create a condition. So for conditions, we can create a condition against a custom Crystal query. So I talked about these queries before. So what's going to happen is if, for example, it detects this query has a count or a value, for example, it's going to trigger that rule. Alternatively, you can go and create a condition against a number of different metrics. For example, the request time, the load time, exceptions, or in our case, traces. So what I can do here is I'm going to go and create a rule where if a trace with a severity level of error comes in, it's going to trigger something. So I'm going to go down, and that metric has a number of dimensions. The one I'm interested in is severity level, and I'm going to select a severity level of 3, which is error. In the logic, you can specify a static or a dynamic condition. For myself, let's keep it simple. I want to trigger this condition when there's a count greater than 0 or equals to 1, or more than 0. Sorry. And it's going to evaluate this rule every minute over 5 minutes of data. So that's it. So I've created my condition. Next, I need to go and specify who I want to notify and how I want to notify them. So that's where action groups come in. Action groups allows you to specify who you want to notify and also what you want to notify with. So we're just going to give it a name. Under notification, you can specify an Azure Resource Manager. So if you're using the identity access management and roles, you can do that. For myself, let's keep it simple. We're going to select email, SMS, push, voice. This allows you to basically type in an email address, an SMS number. If you're using the native Azure app, you can perform a push notification or voice. We're just going to give that a name as well. In addition to notification, there's also actions. So you might want to perform an action when that alert happens, in addition to notifying someone. So if you've got a runbook, so maybe some PowerShell scripts, you might have some APIs. You can call that using an Azure function, a logic app, or webhook. Also, you've got IT service management. So if you've got an IT service management platform, you can automatically log a ticket for you. And that automates that end-to-end process to allow you to assign that ticket to someone within the team. But for ourselves, let's leave it, and we're just going to go and create our action group. So we've now got our condition, we've got our action group. We just need to give our alert rule a name. And I'm just going to go and select the severity level. So this will create like an action item within Azure. So this will just set the severity level of that task. I want to enable this rule by default, and you can automatically resolve alerts. And what that means is if that rule is triggered, it will create an alert. The next time it samples the data, if it doesn't detect the alert, it will automatically resolve it. So now our alert has been created, it's enabled. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and play our app, and let's simulate a few exceptions. So we're going to go to the search screen, and again, let's cause some exceptions. Just like before, I'm going to copy the correlation ID. And I mentioned it does take about 10 minutes or 15 minutes for the data to come through to App Insights. So whilst that's happening, I'm going to talk about something else. So we talked about creating custom alerts. What's also available out of the box with Azure App Insights are smart detection rules. So smart detection rules are like alerts, but they're basically out of the box alerts that are automatically enabled for you. So things like slow page load times, response times, trace severity ratios. So what it will do is it will actually go and look back at the previous day's data or the telemetry and let you know if it's behaving abnormally. So if you go to page load, for example, you can go to the docs. It will tell you how it does the calculation, what it monitors and things like that. But again, it will perform that analysis of the previous day page load analytics and lets you know if it's, for example, a lot slower and has been degraded. So again, these are out of the box rules, which are very useful. So So the next thing I want to talk about is availability. Now, availability is very useful in terms of maybe web applications and monitoring public-facing endpoints. So what an availability test does is it allows you to create a ping test against a public endpoint, and it will let you know if that public endpoint could be a website, or in my case here, my Power App, is returning a 200 or it's returning a success. You can also do some fancy things with synthetics. So if you've got an e-commerce website, for example, you might want to run some scripts, automatically add some items into a cart, perform a checkout, things like that. and it'll let you know if your site is behaving abnormally or there's errors in that process. And again, these are all through alerting. So if it does return an error or it doesn't behave as it should, it will also return, you can also trigger an alert just like we saw earlier. So the last thing that I want to talk about usage is the usage section. So if we click into users, we can see our application telemetry in regards to usage. So we can visually see the data across a number of different chart types. If we go to view more insights, I can start to see and get some insights into how those users are accessing my application. So over the past 24 hours, there were 16 sessions, 80 events, and again, I can drill down and look at those events. You can see the performance is unacceptable, but that's configurable. This is by default. But I can see with those users, where they're accessing it from, what operating system, what browser, and I can actually go and add in additional properties. I can check what application version they're using. I can check what city they're from, what the result code, and I can also look at custom properties that I might be capturing as part of my application. So again, it's like Google Analytics. It's a lot more powerful than I guess what is available out of the box with the Power Platform. But the thing that I want to show you is the usage user flows. So the user flows allows you to see how all your users are using your application within that application. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase the date range or the time range to 14 days just to have a bit more information. We're going to go to page views and we're going to create that graph. So what's going to display is a representation of how our users are traversing our application. So we can see that over the past 14 days, there were 34 sessions. They loaded my application. They landed on the home screen by default. And out of that, there were 17 sessions that went to photos, 13 sessions that went to search, and then, you can see they traversed your different screens after that. And then there were some people that obviously closed the application there and there. So this is a very useful tool to allow you to see how users interacting with your app. You might have a screen where users are finding it difficult to find or to locate. And using this, you can actually help you make more informed design decisions to drive user experience and make your application more user-friendly. So again, this is the user flows. So let's go back to transaction search now. So let's go and see if our alert has now been triggered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and paste in the GUID from before, or the correlation ID from before. And you can see I've got my traces. Okay. If I click into that, I can see the admin user, so that's myself. They were on the Pokemon name search screen, the error message. If I go to the session timeline, I can see that I loaded the app. I went to the home screen, I went straight to the search screen, and I caused that exception. So if I go to alerts, I can see that I have now one new alert. If I click into that alert, you can see I've got a severity level of error. And if I click into that, I can see details about when that alert happened. And also I can see historically how many times that alert has been triggered. So if there's a constant pattern of triggers, I can see that through the timeline, and it will allow me to perform better diagnostic of my application. I can also see things like the history, which is obviously through the timeline as well. So again, that's alerts. And again, I would have received an email. So if I go and just drag this over, you can see this is the email that would have that would have received. Azure Monitor alert was triggered. And also if I have some custom rules or actions like calling an API endpoint or webhook or logging a ticket to my IT service management tool, that would have been done as well. So let's go back and switch over to my slides. So that's pretty much the end of my session for today on monitoring your Canvas Power Apps with Azure Application Insights. I hope you found this session interesting and informative. And again, a big shout out to the organizers of the events and also the sponsors, because they're also the ones that are making this possible for everyone to be able to come together and share knowledge. So please definitely check out the sponsors, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric. If you allow me just 2 minutes more, there are 2 questions in the chat. So
sure.
The first one is, could we see more than 30 days of data?
Yes. So what you'll notice is if you go to App Insights in the transaction search, you actually have the ability to do a custom date range. Okay, so you can actually see a lot more. Now, again, it's worth checking out the App Insights and the log storage, because by default the logs will be stored indefinitely. However, what a lot of other organizations or people will do is they will export those logs into storage when, after a particular point in time, so that they don't incur additional log costs or storage costs. But you can actually see more as well.
Cool. And the other question is the JSON data that needs to have a special schema. Oof, I don't know where the question was.
I think we're talking about the trace function, possibly. So no, you can actually pass in anything that you want. So in the properties. So I'll just go.
It says when you set import JSON in the Maker portal.
Yes. So let's go and back to the search button. So we're going to go to the onSelect event. So if we have a look at the trace, now you can see here at the top, there is, I guess, parameters that you need to pass into trace. So you do need to pass in the message name, which is a string, a severity level, but anything that you include here is completely up to you. So obviously, I've got Pokemon. That wouldn't be relevant to you. I can quickly change that and say, Pokemon name as an example, and I can just do the same thing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that will automatically get stored and accessible as a property, just like we saw earlier with correlation ID. So it's very flexible.
Cool. I think that's also the question. Thank you so much, Eric, for this awesome presentation. I just really want to say thank you a lot. And yeah, the last words are from your side.
Great. And again, definitely, sign up for a free account with Azure if you don't have one already. There's a lot of possibilities with Azure App Insights to take your application monitoring to the next level, because as you develop more and more applications, one of the challenges you'll face is being able to respond to support and issues with your applications quickly and easily. And again, if you've got any additional questions, feel free to reach out via email or social media. And again, thank you again to the organizers and the sponsors. Thanks.
Thanks to you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.